Sarah Crawford remembered that sunny March day perfectly. The wind carried the distinct, sterile scent of hospital disinfectants. As she walked down the long corridor of the medical center, the nurses respectfully made way for her, offering quiet greetings. "Good afternoon, Dr. Crawford." She nodded back with a warm smile. In her left hand, she carried a luxurious, 5-tier custom cake she had ordered for her daughter, decorated with fondant waves. At the very top sat a hand-sculpted little mermaid, which her daughter had been talking about non-stop for a month. In her right hand was a gift bag. Inside was a tie clip that had been custom-made over the last 3 weeks. On the back, it was engraved with a monogram of their initials, SD, a gift for their 6th wedding anniversary. She had wanted to surprise him, arriving half an hour early so they could head out together to his parents' estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The elevator took her to the 17th floor, the executive suite, where the chief medical officer's office was located. The hallway was surprisingly quiet. The receptionist's desk was empty. Apparently, she had left early. Sarah changed into soft flats she kept in her bag, making her footsteps against the marble floor almost completely silent. As she approached his office door, she saw it was slightly ajar. From inside came a low, flirtatious woman's voice, laced with a breathy tone. "Can't you come back a little later? You promised last time, and you lied to me again." Sarah's hand froze over the doorknob. She pulled it back. Then came the velvety voice of David Osborne, filled with a tenderness she hadn't heard once in all 6 years of their marriage. "Listen, be a good girl. Today is my daughter's birthday. The old man is watching like a hawk. I have to go back and play the role of a good dad, but The young woman's voice shot up an octave in annoyance. "You always leave me here alone." "Tomorrow evening," David interrupted, his tone exactly like one would use to soothe an unruly cat. "Tomorrow I'll cancel my appearance at the medical symposium and take you to that exclusive members-only club you've been trying to get into. You want to go to that gallery? That modern art exhibit of yours? I'll go with you, wherever you say." Through the crack in the door, a sliver of light spilled into the hallway. In that sliver of light, Sarah saw a slender forearm wrapping around David's navy blue suit jacket. The nails were painted in the season's trendiest terracotta shade. Madison, his 26-year-old executive assistant. At last year's corporate gala, Sarah had even covered for her when she'd had too much to drink. She watched as David's hand came down on that forearm, not to push it away, but to pat it, reassuringly, like a lover. Sarah didn't open the door. She stood there for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, she managed to do one thing. She took out her phone, pressed record on the voice memos app, and pointed the microphone toward the crack in the door. She recorded a full 14 seconds. It was enough. Play the role of a good dad. Those 7 words acted like a scalpel, surgically slicing open 6 years of her marriage. It turned out all those trips to the amusement park with their daughter, the family dinners where he would hold up a glass of wine and say with deep emotion, "My wife is pure gold. Thank you for everything." And even the framed family photo on his nightstand, it had all been a performance. She looked down at the cake in her left hand. The fondant mermaid had shiny little eyes. Chloe had wanted a blue tail, and Sarah had driven to 3 different bakeries in Manhattan to find the exact right shade. "This is for my daughter, not for him." Sarah carefully shifted the cake to her right hand, then opened the gift bag with her left. She pulled out the tie clip. The cold gleam of silver flashed under the hallway lights. She looked at the SD engraving, and suddenly felt nauseous, a physical wave rising from the very pit of her stomach. At the end of the hall stood a red biohazard bin, specifically for contaminated materials unfit for recycling. She walked over, pushed open the lid, and dropped the tie clip inside. The metal hit the plastic bottom with a soft thud like a sigh. Then, Sarah took out her phone and sent David an iMessage. "Traffic is awful on the Merritt Parkway. I'm going to pick up Chloe and head to the Greenwich house first. Finish up your work and meet us there." The tone was sweet, the words caring. She was, as always, playing the role of the understanding CMO's wife. After hitting send, she closed the chat and selected another contact. Andrew Vance, her college classmate, now one of the top high-net-worth divorce attorneys in New York. She typed just 3 words, "Do you have time?" Then added, "Urgent." 3 seconds later, the reply came, "Always." Sarah slipped the phone into her coat pocket and, carrying the cake, headed back to the elevator. Passing the nurse's station, She caught the eye of a young nurse who smiled brightly. "Dr. Crawford, you look so beautiful today. Happy birthday to Chloe." "Thank you," she smiled back. Her voice was as smooth as a glassy lake. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, she saw her reflection. Flawless makeup, bold lip color, not a single hair out of place. Only she knew that inside her coat pocket, her hand was clenched into a fist so tight her nails were digging into her palm. Not from pain, but from sheer restrained effort. And what she was restraining wasn't grief. It was a searing, explosive clarity. That clarity told her, do not make a scene now, not on his turf. Do not fight a battle on his terms, because you are guaranteed to lose. You have more important things to do. For instance, throwing your daughter the perfect 5th birthday party. For instance, figuring out how many other plays he had staged without your knowledge over the last 6 years. And for instance, while he thinks you know nothing, systematically taking back everything that belongs to you, piece by piece. In the parking garage, Sarah found her car and placed the cake on the passenger seat. The fondant mermaid tilted slightly. She carefully righted it. "Mommy is going to give you a wonderful party today," she said to the empty car, as if making a promise to her daughter, or perhaps to herself. She started the engine, but she didn't drive to Greenwich. She drove to the Ritz-Carlton Central Park, booked a family suite, and asked the staff to decorate it with an ocean theme. On her instructions, the nanny had already picked Chloe up from the estate under the pretext that Mommy had a special surprise. When David Osborne pushed open the heavy front door of the Greenwich estate, the living room was brightly lit. His entire extended family was seated around the massive dining table. But next to the head of the table, where he was supposed to sit, his wife and daughter's seats were empty. There weren't even extra plates set, as if they had never been expected. "Where is Sarah?" His father, William Osborne Sr., set down his coffee cup. Displeasure settled deep into his wrinkles. David froze for a long moment. He instinctively reached for his phone. Sarah's iMessage showed delivered, but the read receipt was off. He dialed her number. "The caller you are trying to reach is unavailable." He dialed again. "Goes straight to voicemail." I'll call her." His voice wavered slightly. He stepped out into the hallway. By the time he dialed the 3rd time, his hands had started to shake. Not from panic, but from an inexplicable, creeping cold rising up his spine. Sarah never turned off her phone. In 6 years of marriage, she had always been reachable. Whether it was 3:00 or right after she stepped out of a lab shift, she always answered. And now, the person who was always there had vanished. It was 1,000 times more terrifying than any argument. He remembered her text from half an hour ago. "Traffic is awful. I'll head to the Greenwich house first." But Chloe wasn't there either. The nanny's phone was also off. In David's jacket pocket rested a velvet Cartier box holding a diamond necklace. He had planned to present it to Sarah tonight in front of everyone. It was a mandatory scene in the Good Husband script, but his leading lady was a no-show. He stood in the hallway of his parents' home, wearing a $4,000 bespoke suit, clutching a dead phone, and suddenly felt unbearably cold. At that exact moment, in the Ritz-Carlton suite, Chloe was sitting on Sarah's lap. In her little hands, she held a slice of cake with the fondant mermaid, her face smeared with frosting. "Mommy, her tail is blue." "Yes, the color of the deep sea." Sarah hugged her daughter. Her voice was soft as cotton. "What about Daddy?" Sarah's hand paused for a fraction of a second. She leaned down and kissed the top of Chloe's head. "Daddy is very busy at work today. We'll see him tomorrow." "Okay." Chloe was immediately distracted by a new toy. At 5 years old, children don't yet know what a lie is. Sarah looked at her daughter's profile. A quarter of those features belonged to David. She suddenly recalled the phrase, "play the role of a good dad." The wave of nausea rose in her stomach again. She stood up and walked into the bathroom. She turned on the cold tap and held her wrists under the running water. The woman in the mirror looked back at her. Her eyes were slightly red, but there wasn't a single tear. "Do not dare cry," Sarah told her reflection. "If you cry, you lose. Not to him, to yourself." She dried her hands and took out her phone to send Andrew a voice memo. Her voice was as flat as if she were reading a lab report. "Andrew, David is cheating on me, with his assistant Madison. I have audio proof. I need you to do 3 things. First, run a forensic sweep on his bank accounts. Second, help me verify the exact legal status of the patent rights for Protavir. 1. Third, prepare all the documents for a divorce filing. The faster, the better. After sending the audio, she added a text. P.S. Do not spook him at this stage. He still doesn't know that I know. Andrew instantly replied with a thumbs-up sticker, followed by a message. Sarah, your cold-bloodedness is terrifying, but it's the right move. In divorces like this, what matters isn't the speed of the scandal, but the number of trump cards you've managed to stash before it begins. Sarah read the text and locked her phone. She returned to the bedroom. Chloe had already fallen asleep, hugging her toy mermaid. There was still a bit of frosting on the corner of her mouth. Sarah wiped it away, pulled the blanket over her, and sat beside the bed for a long time. The room was quiet. Outside the window stretched the nighttime skyline of New York, shimmering with lights that never go out. Leaning against the headboard, Sarah began to mentally inventory her trump cards. Trump card 1, Protavir, the flagship targeted anti-tumor drug of their medical group, currently in Phase 3 clinical trials. The development of this drug, from inception to now, was conducted entirely under her direction, and the core molecular formula was her personal intellectual property. When they married, David had convinced her to transfer the patent licensing rights to Osborne Health as her technological capital contribution. However, she had insisted on one clause in the shareholder agreement. In the event of marriage dissolution, the technological contribution can be revoked unconditionally. David had laughed as he signed it, saying, "We'll never get divorced." Trump card 2, herself. Dr. Sarah Crawford, 32 years old, PhD in pharmacology, a protege of one of America's leading biomedical academics, author of 6 papers in top-tier international scientific journals. Osborne Health had grown from a regional practice into a publicly traded corporate entity not because of CMO David Osborne's handsome face, but because of the formulas in her hands. Trump card 3, William Osborne Sr., David's father. The old man was shrewd and valued reputation and bloodline above all else in life. Chloe was his only granddaughter, the light of his life. If David lost his wife and daughter to his father, it would be an unforgivable sin. Were these trump cards enough? Sarah closed her eyes. Yes, but she was in no rush. She remembered what her PhD advisor had told her. The most dangerous thing in an experiment is drawing conclusions before gathering enough data. So, she would wait. Wait for him to keep acting. Wait for him to make more mistakes. Wait until she had cut off every single one of his escape routes. And only then would she be the one to rip the mask off his face. That night, David called Sarah 23 times, from 9:00 p.m. to 1:00 a.m. All calls went unanswered. He even drove to her parents' house in Westchester. His father-in-law said Sarah wasn't there. Did something happen? Did you two fight? No, David flashed his perfect smile. Her phone must have died. I'll keep looking. Back in his car, he loosened his tie and slammed his fist into the steering wheel. The afternoon scene in his office kept replaying in his head, Madison hanging all over him. Had he closed the door properly? When he said all those things, he thought so. He remembered letting the receptionist go early. Then why had Sarah vanished? A coincidence? Impossible. He rejected his worst fear. Sarah wasn't like that. She was gentle, submissive, completely absorbed by her family and her lab. Even when he occasionally came home late, she simply warmed up dinner and waited, never asking questions. She couldn't possibly know. Clinging to this self-delusion, David spent a sleepless night. The next morning, he received a text from Sarah. The tone was as soft as always. Yesterday, Chloe suddenly wanted to stay in an ocean-themed hotel. I spontaneously decided to take her. My phone died. Just saw your missed calls. So sorry. Sad we missed dinner with your parents. I already called your dad to apologize. David stared at the text for 3 minutes. Every word was normal. The tone was normal. The punctuation was normal. But something felt wrong. It was like a perfectly smooth wall, so smooth there was nothing to grab onto, and that made it suspicious. But he quickly suppressed his anxiety because Sarah sent a photo immediately after. It was Chloe in a mermaid costume, throwing up a peace sign to the camera. The background was the hotel's ocean mural. Sarah's face wasn't in the photo. David replied with a heart emoji and typed, "You're the best wife. I'll come pick you both up at lunch." A short reply came back. "Okay." In the hotel room, Sarah stared at the heart emoji on her screen. The corners of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, just muscle inertia. A conditioned reflex. "He showed affection," she responded. This cycle had repeated for 6 years, becoming second nature. But starting today, the cycle was broken. She closed iMessage and opened another app, an encrypted cloud folder. It contained yesterday's 1-4-second audio clip and a list of documents she had compiled overnight. An inventory of their joint assets, the corporate shareholder structure, scans of property deeds, and a formal request for David's bank statements for the last 3 years. What are scientists best at? Gathering data, building models, and delivering fatal conclusions. Sarah set the phone down and looked out the window. The New York morning was hazy. She suddenly remembered why she hadn't pushed the door open yesterday. Not out of cowardice, not out of shock, and certainly not because she still loved him and didn't want to hurt him. It was because she understood all too well. The moment she opened that door, she would lose all initiative. He would start apologizing, comforting her, staging a performance, unleashing his entire arsenal of crisis management. After all, he was the CMO, the emperor who had flawlessly played the good husband for 6 years. And if she had cried, screamed, thrown a fit, she would have been branded an irrational, hysterical woman, gossip fodder for his family, giving him an excuse to throw her out with pennies. No, she would not play his game. She would create a new game, one David would never comprehend. A meticulously designed experiment built entirely on her rules. Subject: David Osborne. Objective: strip him of everything he stole from her. Duration: undefined. Endpoint: the day of his absolute ruin. Sarah pulled back the curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, washing over her figure. She took a deep breath and walked into the bathroom. Time to put on her makeup. David was arriving at noon. She needed her face to be as perfect as ever. Who said he was the only one who knew how to act? She just wasn't playing the good wife anymore. She was performing her final, tender farewell before the curtain dropped. For the next 3 days, Sarah's life seemed entirely unchanged. She arrived at the lab on time, picked up Chloe from kindergarten on time, and had dinner ready at home on time. When David came home, she handed him his slippers, and his favorite steamed Chilean sea bass was waiting on the table. She even asked if she should prep a lunch for him to take the next day. Everything was business as usual, perfect, like clockwork. But in places he couldn't see, the gears were already grinding in the opposite direction. Andrew's investigation results arrived on the evening of the 3rd day. An encrypted email. The subject line was one word: look. Sarah locked her home office door and opened her laptop. Before her was a ledger of David's bank statements. Over the past 2 years, under the guise of research grants, he had transferred a total of $200,000 to an account belonging to Madison. The justifications varied: academic stipends, travel expenses, manuscript editing fees. Every transfer was backed by forged invoices. Furthermore, a luxury condo in Hudson Yards was registered in Madison's name. The down payment had been made via a personal line of credit in David's name. Sarah stared at the address of the condo for a long time. She knew that building. Last year, when she had suggested buying a larger apartment there, David had said the neighborhood was too congested, and it was a bad investment. Turns out, the investment wasn't bad. It was just meant for someone else. She slowly closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. Through the office door came David's voice. "Sarah? I'm out of the shower. Your light is still on. Working on a paper? Yeah, almost done." Her voice filtered through the wood, soft and calm. "Go to bed. I'll be there soon." The footsteps retreated. Sarah sat in the dark without turning on the desk lamp. Her hands rested on her lap, her fingertips ice cold. $200,000 and a luxury condo paid for with marital funds. By law, this was considered dissipation of marital assets. When the divorce proceedings started, she could demand full restitution and use it as leverage to claim a larger share of the estate. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that if it came to light that corporate funds categorized as research grants were used for personal affairs, it would no longer be a civil dispute. It would be embezzlement, corporate fraud, a federal felony. Sarah didn't smile, and she didn't cry. She just sat in the dark for a long time. Then she typed a reply to Andrew. Keep digging. Don't stop. I need all the data before I initiate the final phase of the experiment. The second report from Andrew came a week later, not via email this time. He brought it in person. He arranged to meet Sarah at an ultra-exclusive private members club in Midtown. Their private dining room had no cameras, and even the waiters were instructed not to enter without being called. Sarah, sit down before you look. Andrew slid a thick folder across the table. Sarah opened it. Inside was a stack of bank records 3 times thicker than the last one, along with several photographs. David and Madison in various locations. The photos spanned the last year and a half. A private screening room, the balcony of the Hudson Yards condo, and even one where Madison, in a silk negligee, was leaning against David's shoulder on a hotel balcony on some tropical island. Last August, he had told her he was flying to Singapore for a medical conference. Sarah's voice was flat, as if she were reading data points. It seems he took her to Bali. Yeah. Andrew lit a cigarette. He rarely smoked unless he was stressed. Sarah, there's something else. I found out that 3 months ago, Madison visited an OB-GYN. Sarah looked up at him. I'm not certain the baby was David's, but the timeline fits. She didn't keep it. It was a miscarriage. But in the emergency contact section of her medical file, she listed David. Silence hung heavily in the room. Sarah placed the photos back into the folder one by one. Her movements were light, as if she were organizing petri dishes. Her face betrayed no strong emotion, but Andrew noticed that the fingertips gripping the photos had turned stark white. Her nails left pale crescent marks on her own skin. Are you okay? Andrew asked quietly. I was just thinking, Sarah began, her voice surprisingly steady. When he signed that emergency consent form, I was in the lab compiling the Phase 3 trial data for Protavir 1. I worked 47 days straight without a weekend. I lost 8 pounds. He even specifically asked our housekeeper to make me chicken soup and deliver it to the lab. He told me, honey, you're exhausting yourself. Don't push too hard. She let out a short, hollow laugh. The sound sent a chill down Andrew's spine. See what an incredible actor he is? Sarah said. So good that I almost believed I had married a human being, and not an exquisitely crafted mannequin. Andrew crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and leaned forward. So what are you going to do now? I have all the materials ready. We can file the divorce petition any day. Sarah shook her head. That's not enough. What? Just getting a divorce, splitting the assets, and ruining his reputation for a few news cycles? It's not enough. Sarah looked up. Her eyes were dark and still, like an oceanic trench where light couldn't reach. He built a publicly traded company on the back of my patent. He paraded my achievements around the scientific community as his own. He made me believe I was just a housewife who needed taking care of, while he kept another woman behind my back for a year and a half. That is not something that can be absolved with the word sorry. Then what do you want? I want him to fall from the absolute highest peak. Sarah's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. And I want him to push himself off the edge with his own 2 hands. Andrew stared at her for 5 seconds, then slowly leaned back in his chair and smiled. All right, then we play the long game. How much time do you need? 2 months, Sarah said. The final results for the Phase 3 trials of Protavir, 1 will be published early next month. And in exactly 2 months is the 30th anniversary gala of Osborne Health. I want to give him his grand finale at that event. In front of everyone. Andrew raised his teacup and gently tapped it against Sarah's untouched cup. To a successful finale, then. Sarah didn't acknowledge the toast. She packed the folder into her bag, zipping it up with the crisp precision of sealing evidence. Andrew, she paused at the door. For the near future, I might have to keep acting. Playing the oblivious, perfect wife in front of him. Can you keep an eye on one thing? See if Madison is trying to track my whereabouts lately. Afraid she'll come confront you? No. Sarah opened the door. I'm afraid she won't. The day Madison came to her would be the perfect opportunity for Sarah to deliver her own performance. Sarah's prediction proved correct. with the precision of a calibrated instrument. In the third week, Madison appeared. That afternoon at 2:30, Sarah had just left the research facility. As she approached the parking lot, a figure in a beige trench coat slipped out from behind a concrete pillar. Madison was wearing a full face of makeup with bright red lipstick. She stood by Sarah's car with reddened eyes and a slightly swollen nose, looking as if she had just been crying. But she was crying aesthetically, that calculated kind of weeping that doesn't ruin eye makeup. "Dr. Crawford," Madison called out. Her voice was thin and trembling. Sarah stopped and looked at her. Her expression was completely placid. No surprise, no anger, as if looking at a random pedestrian. "Madison," she frowned slightly. "What are you doing here? Is something wrong?" Madison bit her lip and lowered her head. This was a gesture she had clearly rehearsed many times, tilting the head slightly, exposing the vulnerable line of the neck, designed to trigger an instinctive desire to protect. "Dr. Crawford, I know I shouldn't have come, but I feel so awful." Her voice shook. "What happened between me and David? I never wanted to fight with you. I love him so much I can't control myself. I love him so much I can't control myself." Sarah mentally translated the phrase, "I am sleeping with your husband, but please don't be mad, because it's all in the name of love." She almost wanted to laugh. "And what exactly are you hoping to accomplish by telling me this?" Sarah's tone was neither cold nor warm. It sounded like she was asking an intern for a status update on an assay. "I want to beg you." Madison looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "Please let him go. He's so miserable at home. You and his father. You demand so much of him. He's suffocating. I'm not trying to take your place. I just want him to have someone by his side when he's exhausted." Sarah listened to this monologue and stayed silent for a brief moment. Then, a soft smile appeared on her face. The smile was measured and tactful. It exuded the kind of grace and upbringing that refused to sink to her level. "Madison, how old are you?" 26. 26. Sarah nodded. "When I was 26, I was in the lab doing primary screening for small molecule targeted therapies. I worked 6-hour days, 3 years without a vacation. That year, I published 2 major papers, and the company's stock tripled." She paused, watching Madison's face freeze. "And what are you doing with your 26 years?" The question wasn't sharp. The tone wasn't even raised, but the effect was like a silent slap to a heavily powdered bubble. Madison's face went pale for a second, but she quickly forced back her pathetic expression. "Dr. Crawford, I didn't come here to fight Madison," Sarah interrupted, opening her car door. "Let me give you a piece of advice. Garbage doesn't turn into treasure just because you hug it tightly. You just end up getting yourself dirty." She got into the driver's seat and slammed the door shut. Through the tinted glass, she saw Madison standing rooted to the spot. Her face flushed dark red. Her lips were moving, but the words couldn't be heard. The carefully maintained mask of the tragic victim had cracked, revealing a thin, ugly layer of pure hatred. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. In her rearview mirror, she caught one last glimpse of Madison, head down, typing furiously on her phone. Definitely complaining to someone. To David, of course. Let her complain, Sarah thought. Tell him how his poor little kitten was bullied by his virtuous wife. Let him pity you. Let him feel he owes you compensation. Let him run further and deeper in the wrong direction, so deep he can never climb back out. This was what you call baiting the hook. And sure enough, that evening, David was unusually attentive. He came home 2 hours early, bringing a box of Sarah's favorite pastries from a high-end bakery in Soho. Walking in, he intentionally softened his face and lowered his voice half an octave. "Sarah, are you tired today? You look a little pale." Sarah was checking Chloe's drawings at the dining table. She looked up and offered a faint smile. "I'm fine. Why are you home so early? Missed you." David set the pastries down and produced a bouquet of white peonies from behind his back. "Passed by a florist. For you. White peonies. They mean true love." Sarah took the flowers and brought them to her face. The petals were cold, fresh from the florist's fridge. "Thank you," she said. Her voice conveyed perfectly calibrated pleasant surprise. "Mommy, so pretty. Daddy bought Mommy flowers." Chloe clapped her hands. David crouched down, hugged his daughter, and kissed her cheek. And Daddy bought you something too. A new 500-piece mermaid puzzle. Yay, Chloe cheered. What an idyllic scene. A husband giving his wife flowers, a father bringing his daughter a gift, the family together, everyone happy. If someone had peeked through the window at that moment, they would have seen the picture of a model family. But Sarah knew the price of this bouquet was roughly equal to his psychological compensation for comforting Madison after their parking lot encounter. You hurt my girl, so I must be extra sweet to you to balance out the guilt, assuming he had any guilt left at all. She put the flowers in a vase. In the kitchen, while trimming the stems, the knife slipped and she accidentally nicked her finger. A drop of blood slowly pooled, then fell onto a white peony petal, red on white, a vivid symbol. She pulled the blood-stained flower out and threw it into the trash can. Life continued in this strange, tension-filled silence. During the day, Sarah worked in the lab on the Phase 3 trial data for Protavir 1. That was her real job, and her ultimate trump card. In the evenings, she still cooked dinner, played with her daughter, and exchanged standard pleasantries with David. Sometimes he took phone calls in the bedroom, lowering his voice. She pretended not to hear. Sometimes in the middle of the night, his phone screen would light up, and he would immediately flip it over. She pretended to be asleep. She even started playing into his hands. One evening, as David stepped out of the shower and sat on the edge of the bed scrolling rapidly on his phone, Sarah walked out of the bathroom and saw him quickly lock the screen. She deliberately walked over and hugged his shoulders from behind. Honey, you must be so exhausted lately. You don't look well. David tensed for a fraction of a second, then habitually patted her hand. It's nothing. Just a lot of corporate evaluations at the clinics right now. Then try to relax this weekend, Sarah's voice murmured right by his ear, soft and coaxing. Don't overwork yourself. David squeezed her hand. Behind his back, Sarah's lips curved into a smile. He couldn't see it. Look at him. Not an ounce of remorse. Remorse requires a soul. And his soul likely died the very first night he spent with Madison. All that was left was inertia. The inertia of maintaining appearances, the inertia of protecting his assets, and the inertia of keeping up the mask of the perfect husband and father. In the 5th week, 1 month before the company's 30th anniversary gala, Sarah's experiment entered its critical phase. That day, she went to the lab as usual, but took the afternoon off. She drove alone to one of the most prestigious office towers in Manhattan, a sleek glass monolith on Park Avenue. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, a man in a dark gray suit stood with his back to her, looking out the panoramic window. The suit fit him flawlessly, tailored with the precision of a scalpel. He was tall, with perfect posture, his hair styled with immaculate sharpness. He exuded the innate confidence of a man accustomed to standing at the absolute summit. He turned around. Dr. Crawford. I'm Carter Sterling. Carter Sterling, the Shadow King of New York's biotech venture capital world, founder and CEO of Sterling Capital. To the general public, his name was virtually unknown. He wasn't on the Forbes list, didn't give interviews, and avoided society galas. But in elite corporate circles, everyone knew there were 3 men in New York whose phone numbers were saved in the private contacts of cabinet members. Rumored to have 0 romantic entanglements, his reputation was as clean as a blank sheet of paper. Mr. Sterling. Sarah walked over and sat at the desk across from him. Apologies for the intrusion. When Andrew recommended you, he said that if I wanted absolute security regarding my patent, you were the only option. Carter Sterling looked at her. He had light brown eyes that, backlit by the window, seemed cold and piercing. But it wasn't a condescending coldness like David's. It was the coldness of an equal, of a grandmaster evaluating another strong player on the chessboard. Dr. Crawford, he began. His voice was low and steady. I've read your paper on Protavir 1. Frankly speaking, the design of that molecular structure is at least 2 years ahead of anything else globally. The fact that you transferred it to Osborne Health as an equity contribution is a travesty. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Are you saying I am saying? Carter leaned forward slightly, his tone unchanging, that if you decide to spin this technology off into an independent venture, I can provide you with a platform that will belong entirely to you, not as an investor, as an equal partner, with no strings attached. Sarah stared at him. Carter didn't look away, nor did he try to aggressively persuade her. He just sat there, calm and immovable as a mountain. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah asked directly. "Do you have a feud with Osborne Health?" Carter shook his head. "Osborne Health is not worthy of being my competitor." The sentence was delivered entirely flatly, without a hint of boasting or contempt, just a statement of fact. But that flatness was exactly what gave it crushing weight. David, who spent corporate grant money on his mistress and bought her a condo, thought he was a big shot. The man sitting across from her had just dropped $2 billion to acquire an entire pharmaceutical supply chain last month, and it hadn't even made the mainstream news. Different leagues. They weren't even playing the same sport. "Then why?" Sarah pressed. Carter was silent for a few seconds before saying something she didn't expect. "When I was 5, my mother also broke free from a suffocating marriage, taking me with her. She had nothing back then except herself." His gaze drifted toward the Manhattan skyline. "Later, she built Sterling Capital from nothing to what it is today. I didn't just inherit a conglomerate, I inherited her ethos. Brilliant people should not be left to rot in unworthy relationships." Sarah remained silent. After a few seconds, she said, "Mr. Sterling, I am open to accepting your partnership offer, but I have one condition. Speak. Until I officially sever all ties with Osborne Health, any contact between us must remain strictly confidential. Only 3 people can know about this, including Andrew." "Understood," Carter nodded, sliding a letter of intent across the desk. "I've already prepared a draft. You can take it with you. If any clauses are unsatisfactory, we will revise them. Time is not a constraint." Sarah picked up the document. Just a few thin pages, crisp and to the point. Not a single wasted word. She skimmed it quickly. Equal shares, independent decision-making authority, a clear exit mechanism, no non-compete dependency clauses. "Mr. Sterling," she stood up, "your business style reminds me of my lab protocols. Precise, clean, with no unnecessary variables." The corners of Carter's mouth twitched upward slightly. It was probably the closest expression to a smile he was capable of. "Dr. Crawford," he stood to walk her to the elevator. "The Osborne family is too small a pond for your ambitions." The elevator doors opened. Sarah stepped inside and turned to face him. Just as the doors began their slow close, she said, "It's not ambition, it's restitution." The doors shut. Leaning against the wall of the elevator cab, Sarah put the folder into her bag. Her heart was beating slightly faster than usual. Not because of Carter Sterling, though. She had to admit he possessed objective qualities that could make a heart beat faster. It was because, as of today, her plan included something she had never had before: an escape route. An absolutely secure path, independent of David, entirely her own. With this path, she was no longer a discarded wife. She was the one choosing to leave. The difference between those two concepts was vast enough to flip the entire chessboard. She returned home that evening. Chloe ran out of the living room and threw herself into Sarah's arms. "Mommy, Mommy! Daddy said we're going to the amusement park this weekend. Is it true?" Sarah picked her daughter up and looked at David, who was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and flashed a flawless smile. "I promised Chloe. You're coming too. The whole family. The whole family." Sarah mentally translated, "My father has been pressuring me lately, demanding that I fix my family life. So I need to stage a public family outing to check a box. Just like that day in his office, playing the role of a good dad. Okay." She smiled back and set Chloe down. "I'll go start dinner." She looked at Chloe. "What do you want to eat, sweetie?" "Shrimp. Big shrimp." "All right, shrimp scampi it is." She walked into the kitchen and tied on her apron. The sound of running water drowned out any noise. Under that cover, she pulled out her phone and texted Andrew. "Deal is struck with Sterling. The escape route is ready." Then she deleted the chat, locked the phone, and picked up a paring knife to prep the shrimp. Her movements were sharp and practiced. One slice, and the back of each shrimp was perfectly split. The dark vein was removed and tossed into the trash, clean, leaving no trace, just like what she was doing right now. The weekend trip to the amusement park went ahead. Chloe rode on David's shoulders, happy as a chirping bird. David took dozens of photos and uploaded them to Instagram with the caption, "Perfect weekend with my girls." Sarah stood nearby, watching him hold his phone. It suddenly struck her that he operated like a precision-engineered PR machine. Every curve of his smile, Every angle of the photo, every word in the caption was calculated. He wasn't enjoying a weekend. He was generating content about a good husband and father. That content would rack up likes and glowing comments. Colleagues would say, "Dr. Osborne is such a family man." Relatives would say, "Sarah is so lucky." And the woman living in Hudson Yards would see those photos, get jealous, cry, call him demanding answers, and he would pacify her by saying, "It's all just an act." Both sides were his audience. Both clapped for his performance while he stood center stage, basking in the thrill of absolute control. Sarah sat on a bench near the carousel. The sun warmed her face. She touched the voice recorder app running in her pocket. It was recording. Today, while riding the carousel, David had taken a phone call, assuming the loud carnival music would drown out his words. He had said into the receiver, "Baby, just endure it for one day. Tonight I'll make an excuse and come see you." The recorder caught it all. Sarah labeled this file Sample 17 and moved it to her encrypted folder. 17 samples. Every single one spoken in his own voice. And they all proved one thing. This man's love was an assembly line product. Mass. Produced. Repackaged for different target demographics. The version for his wife was labeled responsibility. The version for his mistress, passion. For his father, filial piety. For the public, image. None of it was real. Or rather, all of it was equally fake. Sarah leaned her head back and stared into the distance. Chloe was spinning on the carousel, round and round. Her daughter's laughter pierced through the music in the crowd, bright and clear as shattering glass. For a moment, Sarah's eyes welled up, not because of David, but for the years she had genuinely believed in this happiness. For Chloe, who had no idea and thought the actor was the greatest dad in the world, and because one day, she would have to tell her daughter that mommy and daddy weren't together anymore. That day would be hard. But not today. Today, she had to keep smiling and playing along. And when the performance was over, she would take the box office receipts for herself. That evening, after the amusement park, David predictably found an excuse to leave. An urgent executive board meeting about a new initiative. Sarah watched his car pull out of the driveway until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Then she drew the curtains and sat down at the computer in her home office. She opened the encrypted channel to Carter Sterling and typed, "The Phase 3 trial data for Protavir, one will be finalized next week. I need to clarify one variable. If I revoke the patent license publicly at the gala, how much will Osborne Health's stock drop?" Carter's reply came in 3 minutes, in his usual emotionless, clinical style. Given Protavir, one's weight in Osborne Health's projected revenue, if you revoke the license and it goes public at the gala, trading will be halted on the floor that same day. Within 72 hours, their market capitalization will shed approximately $500 million. $500 million. Sarah stared at the number. So that was her price. The price of the woman her husband thought he could easily manage just by playing the role of a good dad. She slowly typed back, "I don't want them to just drop. I want David to push himself off the cliff before the fall." Carter didn't ask for the details of her plan. He simply replied, "Understood." Then he added, "Dr. Crawford, if at any point you require my involvement or logistical support, you have it. Anytime. No strings attached." No strings attached. Sarah let her eyes linger on those words. David had never said no strings attached to her. Every favor from him had a price tag. "See how well I take care of you?" he loved to say. The subtext was, "Therefore, you must obey me. Therefore, you must be grateful. Therefore, you must never embarrass me." But Carter. Sarah shook the thought away. Now was not the time to be distracted. She closed the channel and opened another file. The draft of the letter of intent she was doctoring. It wasn't a fake, but a draft with a fatal flaw embedded in it. Over the next week, under the guise of wanting to save their marriage and being willing to compromise, she was going to offer David an incredibly favorable settlement agreement. The core of the agreement: she would waive her right to revoke the exclusive patent license for Protavir, 1. In exchange, David, in his personal capacity, would act as the primary guarantor for a new medical charity called the Safe Haven Foundation. On the surface, it looked like total capitulation. David would think he had won. He would think, women really are weak in the end. Throw them a bone, show them a little affection, and they'll agree to anything. But buried in the bylaws of the Safe Haven Foundation was a clause that only a top-tier financial litigator would spot. A time clause. If, within 180 days, any misappropriation or non-charitable transfer of funds is detected in the Foundation's accounts, all personal assets of the guarantor shall be subject to immediate legal freeze and forfeiture. And knowing David's nature, asking him to keep his hands off a pile of Foundation money for 180 days was as impossible as expecting a shark to ignore chum in the water. He would absolutely touch it, because he always thought he was the smartest guy in the room. Sarah spent the entire night perfecting the document. When she finally saved the final version at 4:00 a.m., David's car was just pulling into the driveway. Hearing the front door click, she quickly shut down her computer, slipped into the bedroom, crawled into bed, and closed her eyes. He walked into the bedroom. He smelled of unfamiliar perfume, not the kind she wore. In the dark, he undressed silently, took a shower, towel-dried his hair, and then carefully slipped into bed. He even put his arm around her shoulders, exactly as a good husband should. Sarah, keeping her eyes shut, felt the warmth of his hand. Once, that hand had made her feel safe. Now, it only made her sick, but she didn't flinch. Her breathing remained as slow and steady as a clueless, deeply sleeping wife. Her acting skills were getting better and better. After all, she had an exceptional teacher who had been training her for 6 years. In the 6th week, Sarah moved to phase 2. That evening, she deliberately came home an hour early. Taking off her shoes in the foyer, she heard David talking on the phone in his study. He was speaking very quietly, but she caught the key words. The old man, the trust fund. Divorce is absolutely out of the question. She didn't step closer. Instead, she walked into the kitchen and turned on the range hood to create background noise. When David finished his call and walked out, he saw her back as she stood by the stove, tossing broccoli in a pan. "You're home?" he asked. "Yeah, finished early at the lab today," she replied without turning around. "Go tell Chloe to wash her hands. Dinner's almost ready." David nodded and headed upstairs. In those few seconds, Sarah quickly typed a note in her phone summarizing his call. She didn't know who he was talking to. But divorce is out of the question was enough to confirm one thing. David was currently terrified of a divorce. Not because he loved her, but because of the rules of his family. William Sr. was strictly old school. He hated 2 things in life: disrespect to parents and marital infidelity. In his value system, a divorce was equivalent to moral bankruptcy, and moral bankruptcy meant losing your place in the inheritance. Even though Osborne Health was publicly traded, the vast majority of the voting shares were held in a family trust controlled by the old man. He hadn't legally executed the succession yet. That meant everything David currently enjoyed: his CMO title, his board seat, his right to live in the Greenwich estate, was hanging by the thin thread of his father's approval. And having a virtuous wife and adorable daughter was the main knot keeping that thread intact. He couldn't get divorced. It wasn't that he didn't want to, he didn't dare. When Sarah realized this, her lips twitched. She finally saw the whole board. David wanted perfect equilibrium, a wife and daughter for his reputation, a mistress for his pleasure. He thought he was the player and everyone else was a pawn. But he didn't know that his most important pawn had already become a player herself. The next day, Sarah invited David to meet her at a cafe near the corporate headquarters. She chose a window seat and ordered 2 Americanos. Her face wore a carefully crafted mix of exhaustion and hesitation. When David walked in and saw her expression, his pupils contracted slightly. He sat down and studied her without saying a word. "David," Sarah began, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. Her fingers were tense, as if she were wrestling with a difficult decision. "I want to talk to you." David's spine went rigidly straight. "About what?" "About Protavir, 1. She looked up at him. Her eyes held a meticulously designed sense of surrender. "I've been thinking a lot lately. We have our problems, but I don't want them to affect your career." "You've invested so much into Protavir, 1. Sarah. David instinctively tried to cut her off, terrified she was going to bring up divorce. "Let me finish." Sarah held up a hand. Her voice was soft but firm. "I want to say that I'm willing to compromise on the patent. Commercialization of Protavir, 1, will remain with Osborne Health. I will not contest the exclusive licensing rights." A flicker of disbelief flashed in David's eyes, like a gambler suddenly dealt a royal flush. But he quickly composed himself, furrowing his brow to feign concern for his wife. Sarah, you don't need to sacrifice your interests for me. That's not fair. What a textbook line, Sarah scoffed internally. His definition of not fair never meant turning down a benefit. It was just a polite formality before you handed that benefit directly into his palms. She continued exactly as he expected. But I have one condition. Tell me, I want you, in your personal capacity, to act as the primary guarantor for a new medical charity project. The Safe Haven Foundation. The budget is small, an initial $2 million is enough. I'll oversee the charitable direction, and you'll provide the formal leadership and financial guarantee. It will be our new way of collaborating. She said the word collaborating with a hint of vulnerability, as if she were desperately trying to use it to glue their crumbling marriage back together. David listened and quickly ran the math. $2 million was nothing to him. Plus, a charity foundation was fantastic PR, a demonstration of corporate social responsibility. His dad would love it. And most importantly, Sarah was voluntarily giving up her right to revoke the Protavir, one patent, which was the lifeblood of the entire company. Trading a $2 million commitment for a $500 million safety net, any idiot would take that deal. David barely hesitated. He reached across the table and took her hand. Sarah, I agree. We're family. Is there anything we can't work through? He squeezed her hand, absently stroking her knuckles. That gesture used to make her feel warm. Now, she remembered how those same fingers stroked Madison's neck. Then I'll ask Andrew to draft the agreement, Sarah said. You can have your legal team review it, and if everything looks good, we'll sign. Done. David was in fantastic spirits. He ordered a slice of cheesecake and pushed it toward her. Eat something. You've gotten so thin. Sarah obediently broke off a piece and put it in her mouth. The cloying sweetness of the cheese melted on her tongue. She swallowed. An acid churned in her stomach. But she kept smiling as she finished the bite. Back in her car, she finally allowed herself to drop the act. The facial muscles that had been locked into the smile of a tender wife relaxed back into the neutral mask of a lab scientist. She texted Andrew. He agreed. Proceed with the Safe Haven Foundation. Hide the 180-day clause in Appendix C, around page 37. Drop the font size by 1 point. His corporate lawyers won't read 37 pages of appendices word for word. Andrew replied, You know him too well. Sarah didn't answer. The best way to know a man is to live with him for 6 years, only to wake up one day and realize that everything you knew was exactly what he wanted you to see. What he was hiding was his true face. Now, it was her turn to hide things, and she was much, much better at it. The agreement was ready in a week. 43 pages of dense legalese. David's lawyers skimmed the macro structure, verified the core clause, plaintiff waives right to contest exclusive patent licensing for Protavir, won and advised him to sign. The signing took place in the CMO's office. Sarah stood beside him and watched him sign. The nib of his fountain pen flowed across the paper. David Osborne. Done. He set the pen down and smiled at her. Do you feel better now? Yes, Sarah nodded, carefully placing the document into her folder. He had no idea that he hadn't just signed a guarantee for a charity. He had signed the start of a countdown, 180 days. The clock started today. The Safe Haven Foundation was rapidly established. David delegated the day-to-day operations to his CFO, only occasionally checking in. Sarah formally oversaw only the philanthropic planning, but in reality, every time she logged into the system, she was prepping for a final forensic audit. By the 8th week, the absence of the real Sarah began to subtly impact David's life. He didn't notice it at first, because Sarah was still physically there cooking, doing the school runs, attending corporate events on his arm. But something was evaporating, very slowly, almost imperceptibly. For instance, his dress shirts were no longer pressed to absolute perfection. The housekeeper ironed them now, but how could she compare? Sarah knew that the collars of his third type of shirt needed to be ironed half a centimeter higher, otherwise they would chafe his chin. The housekeeper didn't know that. For instance, no one organized the latest medical journals on his desk anymore. Before every weekly strategy meeting, Sarah used to print out all relevant academic papers, arrange them on his desk, and highlight the key paragraphs in yellow. Now there was just a cold glass of water on his desk. For instance, no one was fine-tuning his father's hypertension medication in real time anymore. Sarah used to adjust the dosage every 2 weeks based on the old man's latest blood panels. Now, she just ordered the standard refills. No mistakes, but no precision either. These changes were microscopic. So small that at first, David just felt a vague sense of friction in his daily life, but couldn't pinpoint the source. Until one night, when he stayed late in his study to work, he made a cup of black espresso bitter and harsh and suddenly remembered. In the past, when he worked late, Sarah would bring him a cup of custom-blended herbal tea. She formulated it herself. The concentration was precisely calibrated so he would stay alert without suffering from insomnia later. He hadn't seen that tea in weeks. He picked up his phone and scrolled through his texts with Sarah. Over the last month, the messages were sparse and entirely functional. Chloe painted a picture today. Chloe has dance class at 3:00 on Saturday. I uploaded Dad's lab results to the family iCloud. No, I miss you. No, come home soon. No spontaneous late night. Are you still awake? When did this start? David thought long and hard but couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. Like a frog in slowly boiling water. She hadn't left violently. She was withdrawing from his life drop by drop. But he didn't have time to dwell on it deeply, because Madison was becoming increasingly demanding. The woman had somehow found out about his coffee meeting with Sarah and threw a tantrum. She accused him of trying to play both sides, of stringing her along. She cried. She demanded promises. Promises of what? A divorce? That was impossible. He had to keep buying her off. A designer bag, a Cartier bracelet, dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Every pacification cost money. Every expenditure drained his patience. He was getting tired. He never expected this kind of exhaustion. He was being ripped in two. On one side, a wife who no longer radiated warmth. She performed all her functions, but not an ounce more. Like a precision machine with its emotional module deactivated. He couldn't find a single flaw to complain about, but the chill was palpable. On the other side, a mistress who was an endless black hole of need. She demanded more things, more time, more promises, constantly expanding. David sat in his study, staring at the terrible instant coffee. The bookshelves behind him felt hollow. A sudden, inexplicable dread washed over him. Not the fear that Sarah would find out he believed he covered his tracks flawlessly. It was a deeper, more primal dread. He felt like he was losing something. But the loss was so silent he couldn't even describe it. It was like waking up in the middle of the night to find the other side of the bed cold, yet the pillow still held an indent. The person was gone, but the residual heat hadn't fully dissipated. It was scarier than a screaming match. But David chalked it up to work stress, downed the bitter coffee, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. Sarah was already asleep, facing the wall, the duvet pulled up to her shoulders. Her breathing was steady. He stood in the dark for a moment, then quietly slipped into bed. He didn't know Sarah's eyes were wide open. She was staring at the faint pattern on the wallpaper. Her phone was face down under her pillow. The last message on it was from Andrew. 3 suspicious withdrawals from the Safe Haven Foundation accounts since last week. Destination unknown. Total amount, $100,000. Processed by your CFO, $100,000. He started in week 3, faster than she expected. Sarah smiled soundlessly in the dark. She shifted, pretending to stir in her sleep. David sighed softly behind her and draped his arm over her waist. She didn't pull away. Because very soon, that hand and that man would never be in her bed again. In the 10th week, 3 weeks before the corporate gala, Sarah received an anonymous email. The sender's address was a string of random characters, but the contents made her narrow her eyes. It was a screenshot. It showed David's internal emails, proposing an independent audit of Sarah's scientific papers regarding Protavir. 1. Looking for data discrepancies. He was preparing to accuse her of academic misconduct. He was striking first. Sarah stared at the email for 2 minutes. She had guessed David wouldn't sit still forever. He probably hadn't realized she was running her own op yet, but his survival instincts were kicking in, and his defense mechanism was to try and nuke her academic reputation. If her raw data was called into question, her ownership of the Protavir, 1 patent would be muddied. Then, even if she tried to revoke her equity contribution, she would be dragged into endless litigation over fraudulent data. It was a brutal, cutthroat move. If she hadn't been prepared. But she was. She closed her email and dialed a number. "Mr. Sterling," she said. I need to cash in that favor. Carter Sterling's voice came through 3 seconds later, calm as ever. Speak. David is prepping to accuse me of data falsification. I need an independent third-party organization, entirely separate from Osborne Health, to conduct a public, comprehensive, and transparent audit of my data before he makes his move. The conclusion must be bulletproof. I need it in 1 week. Silence on the line for 2 seconds. Then Carter said, 3 days. Sarah was taken aback. 3 days? My foundation, the Sterling Medical Foundation, has full auditing authority. The director of the foundation was a peer reviewer for your most highly cited paper. He's seen your data and knows its validity better than anyone. 3 days is enough. Sarah gripped her phone. Her palm suddenly felt warm. Not out of gratitude, she didn't allow herself such emotions right now, but from a new, unfamiliar sensation. Someone was backing her up. Not for leverage, not for control, but just because. Dr. Crawford, Carter said suddenly before hanging up. Don't look back. Keep looking forward. The call ended. Sarah lowered her phone and looked out the window. The New York sky was darkening as dusk swallowed the city. She stood in her lab, surrounded by familiar equipment and reagents. These things had been with her for 10 years longer than that man, and far more honest. 3 days later, the Sterling Medical Foundation published a formal, signed audit report featuring a full forensic analysis of her data. The conclusion was a single sentence. The experimental data across all 6 key publications by Dr. Court, Sarah Crawford regarding the targeted molecule Protavir, one is complete, reproducible, and contains absolutely zero evidence of academic or scientific misconduct. That evening, as David sat in his office drafting the internal memo containing his accusations, a notification popped up on his phone. A major biotech industry portal had just published the full Sterling audit. He stared at the conclusion on his screen. His face shifted from white to a sickly bluish hue, and finally to an ugly ashen gray. Who leaked his plan? Who beat him to the punch? He didn't understand, but he knew one thing instantly. He couldn't send that memo anymore. If a prestigious third party had just preemptively cleared her, his accusations would look like malicious slander. It wouldn't just fail to hurt her. It would expose his own agenda. David deleted the draft and slumped back in his chair, exhaling heavily. For the first time, he felt a genuine, visceral threat emanating from Sarah. Not a hysterical threat. Not a threat born of tears and screaming. But the kind of threat where you can't see the sniper, but you know they just chambered around. It was like swimming in the deep ocean and suddenly feeling the current shift. Something massive is moving beneath you. You can't see it, but you know it's bigger than you. 2 weeks remained until the Osborne Health 30th anniversary gala. David changed. Sarah could feel it. He didn't get better. He got more nervous and paranoid. He started checking her schedule obsessively. One evening, she came home to find him in her home office, rummaging through her desk drawers. Looking for something? She asked, leaning against the doorframe. Her tone was as casual as asking what to make for dinner. David spun around. His face was still under control, wearing a default smile. Looking for Chloe's preschool enrollment forms. You printed them out, right? The teacher said we need another copy. They're in the bottom drawer of the credenza in the living room, Sarah said, turning toward the kitchen. She didn't expose his lie. Chloe's forms had been submitted 3 months ago. He just needed an excuse to toss her office. What was he afraid of? What was he looking for? The answer was obvious. The Sterling Foundation report had spooked him. He realized there were unseen variables moving around him, but he couldn't isolate them. He was used to total control, and the second that control cracked, his instinct was to ramp up surveillance. But Sarah had thought of everything. All crucial documents were in the encrypted cloud. The phone she used daily was a clean burner in terms of data. All communication with Andrew and Carter went through secure channels. He could tear her office apart down to the drywall, and he would only find raw assay data, article drafts, and Chloe's crayon drawings. Everything was sterilized. Let him search. The longer he found nothing, the more anxious he would get. And the more anxious he got, the sloppier he would become. Sure enough, that same week, 2 more suspicious transfers hit the Safe Haven Foundation. This time, the amounts were larger. $150,000, disguised as equipment procurement. But Andrew tracked the receiver to an LLC registered 3 months ago. The sole proprietor was Madison's cousin. When Sarah read the report, she was in the lab, finalizing the data archiving for Protavir 1. She pulled off her latex gloves and stared at the numbers on her screen. Her lips curved up. The 180 day trap had triggered on day 63. He was even greedier than she had modeled. She texted Andrew 4 words. Keep logging the trail. Then she texted Carter. I will need a seat at the gala. Carter's reply was a single word. Done. 10 days before the gala, Sarah received a physical invitation in the mail from Osborne Health's events team. Heavy cardstock, gold foil stamping. The 30th anniversary of Osborne Health and unveiling of our newest breakthrough. Her name was on the invite, but not as the lead developer. She was listed as Mrs. Sarah Osborne, wife of CMO David Osborne, wife. 6 years ago, when she married him, Protavir 1 was nothing more than a molecular diagram sketched in her notebook. She had spent 4 years pulling all-nighters, running thousands of assays, enduring endless failures, just to push it to clinical trials. The company's stock had multiplied by 7 since then, and her status at the gala was wife. Sarah placed the invitation on the coffee table. Her expression didn't shift. Chloe ran over, picked up the gold-trimmed card, and turned it over in her hands. Mommy, so pretty. What is it? It's a ticket. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair. A ticket to where? To a very interesting show. Chloe nodded, put the card down, and ran off to play. Watching her daughter's back, Sarah finalized a decision. Chloe could not be anywhere near the fallout zone on the day of the gala. She had to send her somewhere safe, far from the eye of the storm. She picked up her phone and called her mother. Mom, can you watch Chloe next Saturday? I have a major corporate event. Of course, bring her up, her mother's voice was warm, asking no further questions. After hanging up, Sarah did one more thing. She went to the deepest corner of her walk-in closet and pulled out a garment bag. Inside was a black, custom-tailored suit. The shoulder lines were sharp as blades. She had worn it 3 years ago to the International Congress on Pharmacology in Geneva. She had been the only American keynote speaker to take the stage and field questions unassisted. After her presentation, executives from 6 multinational pharma giants had handed her their business cards. She hadn't worn it since, because David had told her, "You look too dominant in that. Wear something softer to the family dinners. Don't intimidate my dad." She had smiled and changed into a beige, A-line dress. Now, she pulled the black suit out and hung it up. She ran her palm over the fabric, smoothing out the microscopic wrinkles. The fabric rustled softly under her fingers, like armor waking from a long sleep. The week of the gala, David stayed late at the office every night. He claimed he was drafting his keynote speech for the new drug unveiling. Sarah knew exactly what the unveiling was, packaging her Phase 3 Protavir. 1 trial results in the shiny wrapper of an Osborne Health in-house breakthrough. Then, standing under the spotlights, playing the dual role of CMO and lead visionary, David would announce it to the world. Her name would probably appear on the final acknowledgement slide, 3rd line down, in small font. That had been her role in the Osborne family for 6 years. Do the heaviest lifting, stand in the darkest shadow. But this year would be different. This year there would be no acknowledgement slide, because this year the protagonist was being recast. 5 days before the gala, after finishing her final archiving tasks in the lab, Sarah gathered all original experimental logs, including handwritten notebooks, sample matrices, and raw digital data. She made 3 copies. 1 went to her encrypted cloud. 1 went to a safe deposit box at the Sterling Medical Foundation. The final copy went to Andrew. Once done, she stood in the center of the lab and looked around. This room had been hers for 6 years. From isolating the prototype molecule to Phase I trials, to Phase 2 dosing optimization, to the massive randomized cohorts of Phase 3. Every single step happened inside these walls. Pinned to a corkboard was a drawing Chloe had made at age 2, a crayon figure in a white coat standing next to a pile of colorful blobs. Chloe had said it was Mommy and her medicine. Sarah unpinned the drawing and carefully slipped it into her notebook. Starting tomorrow, this lab would no longer be hers. She had already drafted her resignation letter. The effective date, the day of the gala. When the dust settled, she would formally exit Osborne Health, citing a change in professional trajectory. But for now, the letter sat in her desk drawer. It wasn't time yet. Everything had to detonate on that stage, all at once. 3 days before the gala, an unpredictable variable occurred. Sarah was at home, packing a weekend bag for Chloe to take to her mother's, when her phone buzzed. A local NYC hospital number. Doctor, Crawford? Are you a relative of William Osborne Sr.? Sarah's heart seized. Yes, I am. What happened? Mr. Osborne suffered a severe angina attack. He's in the ICU. He's stable for now, but we need family here immediately to sign consent forms. Sarah practically sprinted out the door. She made it to Mount Sinai in 15 minutes, faster than she had ever driven. By the time she arrived, William Sr. had been moved from the ICU to a step-down cardiac unit. His face had a yellowish pallor, nasal cannula feeding him oxygen. He was conscious but incredibly weak. When Sarah walked in, his clouded eyes cleared for a moment. Sarah, you came. Dad, don't speak. She instinctively took his hand and scanned the monitors. The vitals were borderline normal, but the EKG curve bothered her. Possible new stenosis. She frowned and turned to the attending cardiologist, Dr. Jenkins. Have you done the coronary angiography? Doctor. Jenkins clearly knew Sarah's medical background and answered directly, not yet. Waiting for family consent. Mr. Osborne insisted we wait for you. Do it. Sarah signed the iPad, then scrutinized the med chart. She pointed to the third line. Swap this for low molecular weight heparin. Dose it by weight. He's 180 pounds. And add 75 milligrams of clopidogrel, once daily. Dr. Jenkins looked at her, didn't argue, and immediately relayed the orders to the nurse. Through all of this, David was nowhere to be seen. He didn't rush in until 40 minutes later. Jacket over his arm, tie loosened, hair disheveled. He smelled faintly of alcohol, not vodka from a business lunch, but red wine, mixed with a sickly sweet perfume that belonged neither in a hospital nor in their home. Dad! He rushed in. His voice was filled with perfectly acted panic. What happened? I just saw the calls. William Sr. looked at him from the bed. His gaze was heavy, like water at the bottom of an abandoned well, deep and freezing. I called you 11 times, the old man rasped. You didn't answer a single one. David's face dropped. He instinctively checked his phone. Indeed, 11 missed calls between 4:00 and 4:30. Where was he then? He was in Hudson Yards. Madison had claimed a severe migraine and begged him to come over. He had put his phone on Do Not Disturb. I was in the operating room. Just scrubbed out. David lied, his voice unnaturally tight. I didn't have my phone on me. I just saw them. His father didn't call him out. He simply shifted his gaze slowly to Sarah and stared at her for a long time. Sarah, he breathed. Thank God for you. The statement was quiet, but it landed in the room with massive weight. So much weight that David's mask cracked the specific, suppressed humiliation of a son being compared unfavorably, put in his place, and exposed as a failure. He stepped up and grabbed his father's hand. Dad, I'm sorry. It won't happen again. His father closed his eyes and didn't answer. David stood by the bed, holding the pose of the dutiful son, but his eyes darted from his father to Sarah. He was trying to read her expression. Sarah simply sat in the visitor's chair, scrolling through the angiography report. Dr. Jenkins had just texted her. Her profile was as calm as a placid lake. She gave him absolutely zero data to interpret. This unnerved David even more. The old Sarah, the wife he had known for 6 years, what would she have done? She would have smoothed things over. She would have said, "He's just exhausted from surgery, Dad," shielding him from his father's wrath. Her tenderness was a safety net that always caught him when he fell. But the net was gone. She sat there like a neutral observer. David's Adam's apple bobbed. He wanted to say something to break the bizarre silence, but his father was already feigning sleep. Left with no choice, he stepped out into the hall. He texted Madison, "My dad is in the hospital. Can't come over for the next few days." Madison instantly replied with a string of crying emojis, followed by, "Seriously? What about the gala? Are you still going this weekend?" David stared at the text for 3 seconds. His father had just had a heart attack and nearly died in the ICU. And this woman's first reaction was to ask if he was still taking her to the gala. A faint wave of disgust bubbled up from his gut, but only for a moment. He quickly shoved it down and replied with one word. Yes. When Sarah walked out of the room, she saw him standing at the end of the hall, typing. The blue light of the screen illuminated his face, cutting it into harsh light and shadow. She didn't approach him. She just slowed her pace as she walked past the nurse's station. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something. The left hand he was using to type was bare. He wasn't wearing his wedding ring. She hadn't noticed it that morning. But tonight, while his father lay in a hospital bed, standing in a hallway reeking of bleach, that bare ring finger was as glaring as an open wound. Sarah looked down at her own left hand, white gold and a brilliant cut diamond. A Cartier classic. He had slipped it onto her finger 6 years ago when he proposed on one knee, saying, "I will take care of you for the rest of my life." Slowly, very slowly, she pulled the ring off her finger. The movement was effortless, like brushing away a dried petal. No hesitation, no regret, just a wave of relief, like ripping off a suffocating bandage. She dropped the ring into her coat pocket. A pale indentation was left on her skin, like a healing scar. It will fade. William Sr. stayed in the hospital for 3 days. For all 3 days, Sarah spent 2 hours every afternoon with him. She adjusted his treatment plan, discussed cardiac rehab with the staff, and even clipped his fingernails. The old man was slightly diabetic. Letting him use clippers himself was risky. No one had ever thought to tell the housekeepers to do it. David, on the other hand, arrived late and left early. He always showed up 5 minutes before visiting hours ended, clutching a bouquet of white lilies. His father hated lilies. Sarah had known since her first year of marriage that the old man was violently allergic to lily pollen. David still didn't remember. Every time he walked in with them, Sarah silently moved the vase to the windowsill, near the draft. David noticed this once and asked, "Why not put them on his tray table?" "Your father is allergic to the pollen," Sarah replied. David froze. "Really? I didn't know. You don't know a lot of things," she thought. But her voice remained flat, devoid of emotion. David opened his mouth to say something, but ultimately kept quiet. On the evening of the 3rd day, as Sarah tucked the blanket around her father-in-law and prepared to leave, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. "Sarah." His voice was weak, but his eyes were sharp. Not the eyes of an 8-0-year-old who just survived a heart attack. "Is something wrong between you and David?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but her face showed only mild confusion. "Dad, why would you ask that? I'm old, but I'm not blind." William Sr.'s gaze was like an old yet still lethal blade. "You look at him differently lately. You used to have a light in your eyes when you looked at him, now you don't. You look at him like he's a blank wall." Sarah was silent for a few seconds. She could have kept acting. She could have said, "Nothing's wrong, we're just stressed with work." He probably wouldn't have pushed, but she didn't. Because despite his stubbornness, his authoritarian streak, and his archaic views, this old man had treated her genuinely well. For 6 years, his grandfatherly affection for her hadn't been an act. He remembered her favorite pastries and brought them to her. He knew she worked too hard and demanded David bring her soup. In front of all the relatives, he called her our Sarah, not David's wife. She didn't want to lie to him, but she couldn't tell him the truth right now either. His heart couldn't take a second shock. She crouched down so she was at eye level with him. Her voice was very quiet. "Dad, there are things I can't tell you right now. But I promise you one thing. No matter what happens, Chloe will not be hurt. I will protect her." The old man stared at her for a long time. Emotions churned in his cloudy eyes, anger, sorrow, or perhaps the bitter realization of the inevitable. Then, he slowly released her wrist, leaned back against the pillows, and closed his eyes. "I trust you." 3 words, simple and firm. They carried more weight than all of David's confessions over 6 years. Sarah stood up and smoothed his blanket. Her fingers lingered on his frail hand for a second, a silent goodbye. Then she quietly closed the door. The fluorescent lights buzzed in the hallway. She leaned against the wall and took 3 deep breaths. She touched the ring in her pocket, cold metal, no warmth. Her phone vibrated, a text from Carter Sterling. 1 line. "Your seat at the gala is confirmed. Table 3, first row. You are registered as an independent scientific consultant, not as a family member." Sarah stared at the words under the harsh hospital lights. Not joy, not vindication, but a long-forgotten feeling of respect, like walking in the dark for miles, and suddenly someone clicks on a flashlight. Not to blind you, but to show you the path beneath your feet. She replied with 2 words, "Thank you." Carter replied, "Don't mention it. Also, black suits you much better than beige." Sarah froze. She hadn't told him about the suit, but he seemed to know everything. He knew without crossing boundaries, maintaining distance. It wasn't surveillance. It was a restrained, steady attention. Like a deep ocean current, you can't see the ripples on the surface, but you know it's there. Constant. Unyielding. She locked her phone and walked to the parking garage. Passing the ER, she saw a young couple walking out. The man was holding up a woman who had a bandage on her arm from an IV. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She smiled and nudged him playfully. An ordinary scene. Sarah had those moments once. She had fainted in the lab once from hypoglycemia. David had sprinted to the hospital, arriving in 20 minutes. It was probably the only time he had been genuinely terrified. He took her home and peeled an apple for her himself. But now, she doubted it. Was there an element of performance even in that panic? If Madison had called him at the exact same moment, where would he have driven first? To her or to Hudson Yards? It doesn't matter, Sarah thought, quickening her pace. She got home at 9:00 p.m. The house was empty. The nanny had taken Chloe to her mother's house in Westchester. David was likely working on the west side again. She sat alone on the living room sofa in the dark. Only the motion sensor light in the foyer was on, casting a warm yellow circle. On the coffee table lay the items she had pulled from her bag one by one. The discarded wedding ring, a copy of the Safe Haven Foundation guarantee, signed by David, a ledger of 17 audio recordings, numbered with dates, durations, and key quotes, the LLC registration papers linking the shell company to Madison's cousin, the Sterling Medical Foundation's forensic audit report, and a printed divorce petition. Official, legally bulletproof, drafted personally by Andrew. Sarah looked at the spread the way she checked the labels on her reagents before starting an assay. Concentrations, expiration dates, everything was there, nothing was missing. She stood up, walked into her closet, and pulled the black suit from its bag. She hung it on the hook next to her full-length mirror and took a step back. The fabric caught the dim light, throwing off a cold, velvety sheen. The shoulders were sharp as razors, the waist impeccably tailored. 3 years, she whispered, as if greeting a long-lost friend. She took a shower, washed, and dried her hair, and applied her full skincare routine. While massaging lotion into her hands, she inspected her nails. Not a single hangnail. Perfect shape. She did all of this with meticulous care, treating it as a ritual. Not for vanity, but for integrity. A person preparing to execute an action that would permanently alter the rest of their life needed to be in peak condition. Not for anyone else, but to honor their own resolve. Late that night, David returned. Lying in bed, she heard the deadbolt click, the sound of shoes hitting the floor. Footsteps crossed the living room and paused by the coffee table. Sarah's heart skipped. She had forgotten to put the documents away. But a few heartbeats later, the footsteps moved toward the bathroom. The shower turned on. She exhaled slowly. The living room was dark. He probably couldn't see what was on the table, or if he did, he assumed it was her lab paperwork. He had never once shown an interest in her lab paperwork. The water stopped. The door opened. He walked quietly into the bedroom and undressed in the dark. The faint metallic clink of hangers, he was picking out his suit for tomorrow. Then he slid into bed and, as usual, draped his arm over her waist. His fingers brushed her skin. The familiar warmth that once brought her peace. Sarah didn't open her eyes, and she didn't move. One last time, she thought. Starting tomorrow, this hand will never touch me again. Good night, he whispered into the dark. Sarah didn't reply. She maintained the breathing rhythm of a person in deep sleep. 14 breaths per minute, even and deep. David's hand rested on her waist for 2 seconds, then slowly retreated. He rolled over and fell asleep within minutes. His breathing was smooth and untroubled. The sleep of a man with a clear conscience. Sarah opened her eyes. There was a faint water stain on the ceiling from a leak last year. She stared at it and remembered. The pipe had burst while he was supposedly on an overnight on-call shift. She had handled the plumbers alone, moved furniture, and mopped floors for an hour. She had felt bad for him and texted, "Handled the leak. Don't worry. Focus on your patients." Now she knew that he had been in Hudson Yards that night, eating sushi and watching a movie with Madison before spending the night. The next day he came home complaining about how exhausted he was from the ER. She, out of pity, had made him soup. What a joke. Sarah tore her eyes away from the ceiling and looked at the sliver of light bleeding through the curtains. Dawn was coming. Tomorrow was already here. She closed her eyes and gave herself one final command. Sleep. You need your best form. And she slept, deeply, without dreams. Like a sharpened blade sliding back into its sheath, quiet but lethal. The alarm went off at 7:00 a.m. The first thing Sarah did was look at the other side of the bed. Empty. David had already left, probably headed to the venue for a final run-through. The sheets on his side were still wrinkled, a shallow indent on the pillow. She stared at the indent for 2 seconds, then got up and violently threw back the curtains. Blinding, unforgiving sunlight flooded the room, incinerating every shadow. She took a deep breath and began to prepare. Skincare. Foundation. She chose the most expensive one, 2-hour matte foundation she owned. No mistakes allowed today. She drew her eyebrows slightly sharper than usual, the arch 0.5 millimeter higher, giving her face an edge of ruthlessness. For her lips, she chose a cold, classic, matte crimson. Not her usual soft nude. This was war paint. Then came the black suit. When she put it on, the woman in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. This was not the CMO's wife. This was not the gentle mother. This was not the soft woman in an apron asking what to make for dinner. This was a brilliant, razor-sharp scientist who held the fate of an entire corporate supply chain in her hands. The real doctor, Sarah Crawford. She had spent 6 years shoving herself into the mold of the perfect wife, sanding down her edges, blunting her sharpness, until she had almost forgotten who she really was. Now, she remembered. She stared at herself for a long time. Then she pulled the wedding ring from her pocket. The white gold glinted coldly in the morning sun. She placed it on her vanity, right next to their framed wedding photo. In the photo, they were smiling so beautifully. The ring sparkled on the bride's finger. Now, the ring was outside the frame, completely out of place, just as she was about to step entirely outside the role they had scripted for her. Finally, she picked up her phone and texted Andrew, "I'm heading out." Andrew replied instantly, "All assets are in position. A tech will hand you the flash drive when you arrive. You take the stage at exactly the 40-minute mark of Osborne's speech. That's your window." "Understood," Sarah replied. Then she drafted one more text, to Carter. She hesitated, typing and deleting twice. Finally, she sent a single sentence. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for today, regardless of the outcome." Carter's reply was immediate. No fluff. No, good luck or you've got this. Those words were too lightweight for what she was about to do. He sent 2 words. Execute it. Sarah locked her phone and took one last look in the mirror. Crimson lips. Black suit. Eyes the color of the deep ocean. It's time. She grabbed her car keys, picked up the black leather briefcase containing all her evidence, and walked out. Her heels clicked against the concrete of the garage. Every step was crisp and decisive, like a countdown, like pulling back the hammer of a gun, like taking a lungful of air after nearly drowning. She started the engine and drove out. In the rearview mirror, the house she had lived in for 6 years grew smaller and smaller, until it shrank into a tiny speck of light and vanished into the crisp New York autumn morning. She never looked back. The venue for Osborne Health's 30th anniversary was the Grand Ballroom at the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan. When Sarah's car pulled up to the valet, a line of black executive vehicles already stretched down Fifth Avenue, S-Class Mercedes, Bentleys, and the occasional Stealth Wealth Custom SUV. The owners of these vehicles represented the absolute apex of New York's medical, financial, and biotech sectors, and today, they had all come to congratulate David Osborne, or rather, to celebrate the imminent windfall of Protavir 1. They had no idea that the true owner of Protavir 1 was currently walking toward the entrance in a black tailored suit and 4-inch stilettos. The attendant at the registration desk froze when he saw her. On his VIP list, next to Sarah Crawford's name, was the designation, Wife of CMO. But the woman standing before him looked nothing like a trophy wife meant to blend into the background. "Mrs. Osborne, your seat is at the head," the attendant began, flipping through his pages. "Table 3. First row," Sarah said calmly. "My invitation was issued under the title of Independent Scientific Consultant. Please check the addendum." The attendant flipped to the secondary VIP list and found the new entry, Dr. Sarah Crawford, PhD, special guest of the Sterling Medical Foundation. The entry had been added 3 days ago. The authorizing signature was unfamiliar to him, but the stamp belonged to the Pierre's Ultra VIP management team. "Ah, yes, Dr. Crawford. My apologies. Right this way." His address shifted from Mrs. Osborne to Dr. Crawford, and his tone jumped 3 levels in deference. Sarah walked into the ballroom. The crystal chandeliers blazed like a galaxy. The round tables were draped in midnight blue velvet. In the center of each was an arrangement of white calla lilies. Osborne Health's corporate colors. Blue and white, symbolizing technology and purity. A massive LED screen dominated the stage, currently looping a slickly produced video covering the company's 30-year history. Sarah was in the video, twice. Once in a wide shot of the lab, wearing a white coat, hunched over a microscope. She took up less than a quarter of the frame. The second time was a group photo where she stood in the far corner, the graphic, leading R&D team blocking half her face. Sarah glanced at the screen and looked away. It didn't matter. After today, every single person in this room would remember her face. Table 3 was perfectly positioned, barely 30 feet from the stage. Taking her seat, Sarah surveyed the room. At the surrounding tables sat industry titans, hospital directors, Ivy League department heads, CEOs of massive pharma conglomerates. Seeing Sarah sitting there, several recognized her, looked surprised, and whispered to one another. But their attention was quickly diverted by waiters circulating with champagne. Sarah didn't touch her glass. Her gaze cut through the crowd and locked onto the main table. The Osborne family sat there. A place card with David Osborne sat front and center. Next to it was an empty chair with a card reading, Mrs. Sarah Osborne. That was supposed to be her seat. But today, she chose table 3. Not because she couldn't sit at the head table, but because she refused to ever be seated under the title of someone's wife again. She needed her own name, her own seat, her own power. At 10:00 a.m., the gala officially began. David took the stage. Sarah watched him. He was wearing the $4,000 navy blue bespoke suit. She remembered that suit. Last year, they went to his tailor in Tribeca to take measurements. She had helped him pick the wool, the buttons, and had specifically told the tailor to bring the shoulders in by 2 millimeters so he would look leaner. He was wearing armor she had designed for him, standing on a stage to steal her life's work. The irony was suffocating. David's opening speech was slick and flawless. A deep, confident baritone, gestures projecting the commanding presence of a young, visionary medical CEO. Polite applause rolled through the ballroom. For 30 years, Osborne Health has made it our mission to tackle the most complex challenges facing human health. The screen transitioned to a massive rendering of a molecular structure. Protavir 1. Sarah could draw that structure with her eyes closed. She had sketched it on scrap paper at least 3,000 times. And today, it is my profound honor to announce that the Phase 3 clinical trials for Protavir 1 have concluded with absolute success. David boomed. We hit every single primary endpoint. This means we are only one step away from bringing this revolutionary targeted therapy to millions of patients. The ballroom erupted in applause. David stood in the blinding wash of the spotlights, soaking it all in. In his eyes was a gleam Sarah knew all too well, the intoxicating arrogance of a man who believes the world revolves around him. He continued speaking about the development journey, the team's dedication, the power of Osborne Health's in-house innovation. His phrasing meticulously avoided specific names. He used only corporate plurals, our team, our scientific infrastructure, as if Protavir 1 had simply materialized out of thin air, with zero credit given to the actual human being who bled for it for 4 years. Sarah sat perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask. Her hand rested on her knee, fingertips brushing the leather of her briefcase on the floor. Not yet. Let him talk. Let him take all the credit. Let him say the words in-house breakthrough as loudly as possible. Because the louder he yelled it, the more deafening the sound of the slap would be. At the 3-5-minute mark, David moved to his conclusion. Finally, as we close this chapter and look to the future, I want to extend a very special thanks to one person. His eyes scanned the room, dropping immediately to the head table, looking for her in the wife chair to deliver his touching, dedicated finale. But when he looked at the main table, the chair was empty. His face froze for a fraction of a second. He quickly scanned the next few rows and finally spotted her at table 3. She sat there, entirely in black, her lips painted a cold, stark crimson. The uplighting caught her profile, making her look sharp, predatory, and entirely unfamiliar. David's Adam's apple bobbed. In that split second, he must have realized something was horribly wrong, but the teleprompter and the spotlights didn't allow him to stop. I want to thank my family. And everyone who poured their sweat into Protavir. 1. He rushed the ending. Thank you all. More applause. David bowed slightly and turned to walk off the stage. At that exact moment, Sarah stood up. She moved deliberately, one hand on the table, the other gripping the black briefcase. The sound of her chair sliding back was lost in the applause, but the VIPs nearby noticed. A woman in a black power suit, wearing blood-red lipstick, standing up and striding purposefully toward the tech booth beside the stage. Dr. Crawford? Whispered a Columbia academic sitting next to her. Where are you going? Sarah didn't answer. She gave him a microscopic nod and kept walking. Her heels sank into the thick carpet, making no sound, like a panther stalking its prey. She reached the tech booth. A young AV technician looked at her and silently handed her a flash drive. This was Andrew's guy. They exchanged a glance that lasted less than a second. The tech plugged the drive into the master control laptop. All of this happened in 15 seconds. David had already descended the stairs and was standing by the main table, shaking hands with board members. His smile was radiant. The posture of a victor. He had absolutely no idea what was happening, until the MC walked back out to the podium. According to the run of show, the MC was supposed to introduce a corporate sizzle reel, followed by a champagne toast. But today, the script had been rewritten. The MC had just been handed a new index card. He hesitated, looking off stage. He saw a sharp nod from the woman in black standing by the booth. He swallowed hard and leaned into the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, we now invite a very special guest to the stage, representing the Sterling Medical Foundation and the lead author and patent holder of Protavir, 1. Dr. Sarah Crawford, for an addendum presentation. The ballroom went dead silent for 2 seconds. Then a tidal wave of whispers swept over the crowd. Lead author? Sarah Crawford? Osborne's wife? She holds the patent? The champagne flute in David's hand stopped midway to his mouth. He whipped around to face the stage. Sarah was already standing at the podium, bathed in the spotlight. As the light hit her face, Sarah felt absolute, ringing clarity, no nerves, no rage, not even triumph, just a profound sense of completion. Finally, she looked out at the sea of faces, hundreds of eyes locked onto her. Curious, confused, expectant, panicked. David's eyes were pure terror. He had already bolted up from his chair. He practically slammed his glass onto the table. His lips were moving. He seemed to be mouthing, "Are you insane?" Sarah didn't look at him. She addressed the room. Her voice, amplified by the Pierre's state-of-the-art acoustic system, reached every corner of the grand ballroom. Crisp, level, and entirely devoid of a tremor. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I am Dr. Sarah Crawford. I apologize for interrupting the celebratory mood, but there are things that, if not said today, may never have the chance to be said at all. She clicked the presentation remote. The LED screen behind her flashed. Slide 1, her academic CV. Cover pages of her 6 landmark papers. A complete timeline of Protavir, 1's R&D, from molecular design to phase 3 trials, under lead investigator for every single phase. Her name, the molecular design of Protavir, 1 began in March 2019. Her tone was as clinical as if she were defending a thesis. Up until the phase 3 trials concluded this year, the entire pipeline was under my direct supervision. The core molecular architecture, the targeted binding sites, the animal models, all stem from my original independent research. This data was subjected to a rigorous, third-party forensic audit by the Sterling Medical Foundation just last week. The report verifying my sole authorship is public. The whispering in the room escalated to a hum. The experts in the crowd exchanged shocked looks. Every number she cited, every paper she referenced, they could verify it on their phones right now. Sarah clicked the remote again. Slide 2. A scanned legal document. The patent licensing agreement. Highlighted in stark yellow. Party B, Dr. Sarah Crawford, transfers exclusive licensing rights for the Protavir, one patent to Party A, Osborne Health, as an equity contribution. License renews automatically for the duration of the marriage. Clause 4.1. In the event of marriage dissolution, the technological contribution may be revoked by Party B, unconditionally and immediately. The ballroom plunged into a physical, suffocating silence. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. Everyone stared at the massive screen. David's face turned a color Sarah had never seen on a human being. Not pale, but an ashen, necrotic gray. Like a man suffocating on dry land. He took 2 steps toward the stage, his mouth hanging open. Sarah, she didn't let him speak. She clicked to the 3rd slide. Slide 3. An audio waveform appeared on the screen. She hit play. The ballroom's pristine speakers broadcasted the file perfectly. Listen, be a good girl. Today is my daughter's birthday. The old man is watching like a hawk. I have to go back and play the role of a good dad. Tomorrow evening, that exclusive club. Wherever you say. David's voice. Crystal clear, word for word. Hundreds of people heard it simultaneously. Someone gasped. Someone instinctively covered their mouth. Others shot sideways glances at their own spouses, thinking, "Thank God that's not me." Sitting in his wheelchair at the head table, having insisted on attending, despite his recent heart attack, William Osborne Sr. heard the phrase, "play the role of a good dad." The old man slumped backward, as if his spine had been instantly removed. There was no anger on his frail face. Just something far worse, utter, terminal disappointment. Sarah saw his reaction. Her heart ached for a split second, but she did not stop. If she stopped now, it would all be for nothing. David would deploy his crisis PR. He would say the tape was a deepfake. He would say she was having a psychotic break. He would muddy the waters in 1,000 different ways. She had to drop every single bomb, right now. Slide 4. A bank ledger. These are the financial records of the Safe Haven Foundation, a charity for which David Osborne serves as the primary personal guarantor. Sarah's voice was ice. In the less than 3 months since its inception, 3 transactions totaling $250,000 were funneled out as equipment procurement to a shell LLC. She pulled up the LLC's incorporation documents. The sole registered owner of this shell company is the cousin of David Osborne's executive assistant and mistress, Madison. Board members and major investors were standing up now. Their faces were whiter than David's. Because this wasn't just a scandal anymore. This was corporate embezzlement, wire fraud in a publicly traded company. The SEC would be breathing down their necks by Monday. David finally snapped. He lunged for the stage. His voice was hoarse, tearing from his throat. "Turn it off. Cut the screen." He tried to scramble up the steps to rip the mic away, but 2 massive security guards in black suits materialized out of nowhere and blocked his path. Carter Sterling's men. They were prepared for this. "Sarah!" David screamed from the base of the stage, thrashing against the guards. His eyes were bloodshot. His meticulously maintained, handsome face contorted into something feral. "Are you out of your fucking mind? Do you know what you're doing?" Sarah stood at the podium, looking down at him. The spotlight hit her from behind, casting a long, sharp shadow over him. He was pinned at the bottom of the stairs like a trapped rat. She leaned into the mic. Her voice was quiet, but it echoed like thunder. "What am I doing?" She tilted her head slightly. "I am doing exactly what you did for 6 years. Taking what is mine, with one difference. I don't have to act." David froze. He stared up at her as if seeing her for the first time. This woman in the spotlight, wrapped in black, with eyes like scalpels. The woman in the apron, smiling in the kitchen, asking what he wanted for dinner, they seemed like 2 entirely different species. "Sarah," his voice suddenly dropped, attempting to pivot to his persuasive, intimate tone. "Let's talk. Not in front of everyone. What's wrong with doing it in front of everyone?" Sarah cut him off. "You stood in front of everyone to soak up the applause, the accolades, and the glory you didn't earn. So today, in front of everyone, you are going to give it back. She clicked to the final slide. Black background, white text, massive font. Impossible to miss. All exclusive licensing rights to the Protavir. One patent are hereby revoked by the legal owner, Dr. Sarah Crawford. Effective immediately, Osborne Health is stripped of all rights to the commercialization of this asset. That single sentence hung over the ballroom like a guillotine blade dropping onto the neck of the Osborne Health empire. Sarah watched the major shareholders turn white. She saw them frantically yanking out their phones to check the stock tickers. Even though the markets were closed for the weekend, the moment this news hit Bloomberg, the stock would gap down to zero on Monday morning, and it would stay there. Dr. Crawford, a balding man in his 50s, stood up from table 2. A major hedge fund manager, his voice shook. You can't do this. Sarah's gaze shifted to him. Her voice was terrifyingly polite. Mr. Gallagher, 3 years ago when your fund injected capital into Osborne Health, the due diligence report explicitly outlined how the Protavir 1 IP was structured. It clearly stated the patent was tethered to a marital contract. The balding man opened and closed his mouth like a dying fish. If you missed that, Sarah said, I suggest you direct your anger at your risk analysis team, not me. The ballroom was dead. Sarah placed the clicker down on the podium. She was done. Every card was on the table. Nothing left up her sleeve. She looked down at David one last time. He had stopped struggling against the guards. He stood there like a hollowed-out husk. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. In his eyes, once so arrogant, so assured, there was only a void she had never seen before. Not rage, not hatred, but the devastating disorientation of a finished game, like an actor who had played a role his entire life, only to have the curtain violently ripped away, revealing that backstage, there was nothing. No audience, no applause, no lights. Just a barren wasteland with no way out. Sarah walked down the steps. She walked right past David. She didn't pause. She didn't turn around. She didn't even look in his direction. She walked past him like a piece of old, discarded furniture. But just as she passed him, she heard him whisper, hoarse and broken, "Why?" Sarah's pace slowed for half a second. Then she kept walking, her rhythm unbroken. "Why? Because you forced me to be a prop on your stage for 6 years. So today, I burned your theater down. It wasn't revenge, it was a repossession. I just took back what you borrowed. That's all." When she walked out of the Pierre's revolving doors, the autumn sun hit her face. The air outside was so crisp it made her want to fill her lungs to bursting. The air inside had been stale for 6 years. Her phone vibrated. A text from Carter. Flawless execution. Car is at the east entrance. Sarah walked to the 61st Street exit. A dark gray Maybach was idling at the curb. The tinted window was rolled down a third of the way, revealing Carter's sharp profile. She walked up to the car. Before she could say a word, the rear door swung open from the inside. Not by the driver. Carter had reached across the console to open it himself. "Get in," he said. He didn't ask, "How are you?" or, "Are you okay?" He could see she was fine, more than fine. Sarah slid into the back seat. The cabin smelled faintly of sandalwood. The climate control was set exactly 2 degrees cooler than the outside air. Perfect. The heavy door thudded shut, instantly muting the chaos, screaming, and panic happening inside the hotel. It was like hitting a mute button on the world. Carter sat next to her, maintaining a respectful distance. He didn't rush to speak. He didn't rush the driver. Sarah leaned her head back against the plush leather, closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and then opened them to look at him. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice slightly raspy, not from crying, but from the adrenaline crash. "I need to go somewhere right now." "Where?" "To my mother's house in Westchester," she said. "I want to get my daughter." Carter nodded and gave the driver the address. The Maybach glided smoothly away from the curb. Sarah stared out the window as the city rolled by. Sunlight filtered through the golden leaves of Central Park, casting dancing shadows across her face. Her phone began to vibrate violently, calls from David, one after another. She looked at the name on the screen, then flipped the phone face down on the seat. Let him call. Let him panic. Let him finally understand what it feels like to call someone who will never pick up. Just like he did on his daughter's birthday. sitting in Hudson Yards with his phone on Do Not Disturb. The car stopped at a red light. Carter suddenly spoke. "Your hands are shaking." Sarah looked down at her right hand. It was, indeed, trembling. Very finely, almost imperceptibly, but he had caught it. "Adrenaline," she said. "Standard physiological response. It'll pass." She covered her right hand with her left and squeezed. Carter didn't say anything else. But he reached into the rear console cooler, pulled out a bottle of sparkling water, unscrewed the cap, and placed it in the cup holder next to her. He didn't hand it to her. He placed it so she could take it on her own terms. "Thank you." Sarah picked it up and took a long drink. The freezing water slid down her throat, dousing the residual fire in her chest. As the car drove onto the West Side Highway, she looked out the window and suddenly let out a soft laugh. "What is it?" Carter asked. "Nothing," she said. "I was just thinking that, starting today, I never have to act for anyone ever again." Carter looked at her profile, bathed in the golden hour light. The tension was finally gone from her jaw. "You never had to in the first place," he said. The car eventually turned into a quiet, leafy suburb in Westchester. Before getting out, Sarah turned to Carter. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "about our next steps. The new lab, the partnership. We'll discuss it another time. Today, I just want to be a mother." Of course, Carter's voice was warm. "Time is not a constraint. Whenever you're ready." Sarah nodded and stepped out. The moment she rang the doorbell, she heard the rapid pitter-patter of tiny feet. The door flew open, and Chloe threw herself into Sarah's arms. "Mommy, Mommy's back!" Sarah dropped to her knees and crushed her daughter in a hug. Chloe's hair smelled like strawberry shampoo. Her warm little cheek pressed against Sarah's neck. She closed her eyes and held her even tighter. "Mommy, you look so pretty today," Chloe's muffled voice came from her shoulder. "Really? Yeah, like a movie star." Sarah laughed out loud. A real laugh this time. Not the forced, exhausting smile she wore in the living room for her husband. Not the gentle, reassuring smile she wore for her father-in-law in the hospital. But a laugh that came from the very bottom of her soul, echoing through every muscle in her body. She picked Chloe up and looked at her mother standing in the doorway. Her mother's eyes were slightly red. She had probably already seen the breaking news alerts on her iPad, but she didn't ask a single question. She just reached out, touched Chloe's back, and said, "Come inside. I made your favorite iced tea." Sarah stepped over the threshold. Behind her, the dark gray Maybach idled for a moment longer before smoothly driving away. The street returned to silence, like the ocean after a hurricane. The massive, violent waves had retreated to the depths, leaving nothing on the surface but pure, boundless, deep blue. At 10:00 p.m., Chloe was fast asleep. Sarah sat on her mother's back patio, a throw blanket draped over her knees. Her phone lay on the patio table. The screen lit up sporadically. The number of missed calls from David had reached 67. He had also sent over a dozen iMessages. They ranged from the initial, "Are you insane?" to "Sarah, let's talk," to "I can explain everything," to "Please pick up the phone." The final message had come in 20 minutes ago. "I was wrong." Sarah stared at those 3 words for a long time, then locked the screen and set the phone down. Wrong. About what? Wrong for cheating? Wrong for stealing her life's work? Wrong for treating her like a stage prop? Or just wrong because he got caught? If she hadn't walked onto that stage today, would he ever have thought he was wrong? No. He would have kept acting, playing the good husband, the good dad, the visionary CEO. He would have kept playing the game until she grew old and useless, at which point she would have been ushered out with a polite NDA, a condescending "thank you for the best years of my life," and an insulting alimony check. So he didn't think he was wrong. He was just realizing he had lost. And to a man who had been smug his entire life, losing hurt 1,000 times more than being wrong. Sarah stood up and folded the blanket. The night wind off the Long Island Sound blew across the patio, cool and crisp with autumn. She took a deep breath. Starting tomorrow, she would have a mountain of tasks: the divorce proceedings, the brutal legal war to formally reclaim her IP, setting up the new biotech firm with Carter, and, hardest of all, figuring out how to explain to Chloe that Mommy and Daddy weren't together anymore. None of it would be easy, but she wasn't afraid anymore. Because starting today, every single step she took would be her own choice. Not forced upon her. Not manipulated out of her. Not written into someone else's script. Her own path, belonging to no one but herself. Sarah closed the patio door and walked back inside. Passing the mirror in the hallway, she caught a reflection. No makeup. Sweatpants. Hair tied up in a messy ponytail. She looked nothing like the cold, lethal executive who had stood on that stage hours ago. But the eyes hadn't changed. They were the same clear, calm eyes that no longer needed to look for validation in anyone else's gaze. She smiled at her reflection. "Good night," she whispered to the mirror. Then she turned off the lights and went into the bedroom to sleep next to her daughter.